Welcome to the Sierra Club's Earth Day Forum on the Inglewood Oil Fields. I'm Barbara Hensley, I'm the host, and as a former nurse, I want to extend best wishes to you during this challenging time. Also, as a former neonatal ICU nurse, I'm acutely interested in this topic because of the dangers oil drilling poses to newborn babies and pregnant women. We have a great group of panelists for you today, and I want to introduce them. First, there's State Senator Holly Mitchell from the 30th State District, and she's the chair of the Budget Committee in the State Senate. Next, we have State Assembly Member Sydney Kamlager from the 54th District, and we have with us Culver City Council Member Daniel Lee. From the Sierra Club, we have the Sierra Club Associate Director of Beyond Dirty Fuels campaign, Monica Embry. And our moderator and physician is David Hockey, who's the chair of the Sierra Club's Clean Break team from the Angeles chapter. I'd like the panelists to introduce themselves and give us one tip on how you're surviving the pandemic. And Senator Mitchell, would you go first?
Happy to. So happy Earth Day, and thank you so much for inviting me. This Zoom, this webinar gave me the excuse to actually come outside. One thing I'm trying to do is just kind of create a sense of balance for myself. I am so consumed, I think, of the everyday work as chair of the Senate Budget Committee, as chair of the Joint Legislative Budget Committee, that I'm spending more time than is probably healthy for me inside, either Zooming or on teleconference calls. And so taking a break to walk 13-year-old golden retriever Rusty. But now you all gave me the excuse to just sit and be still outside and get some sun rays for this webinar. So thank you for the opportunity.
Next, can we have State Assembly Member Sydney Kamlager?
Hi, great. Well, thank you, Barbara. And as was mentioned, I am Sydney Kamlager. I am the Assemblywoman for the 54th Assembly District. Happy to be here. Happy Earth Day. Although I believe we should be celebrating and loving Mother Earth every single day of the year. And as you can see, I think in the midst of this pandemic, she is telling us that we have been bad stewards of her. And hence this is why we are in trouble. So I hear you, Mother Earth, I hear you. This has been incredibly stressful. I actually have a number of family members who are either in nursing homes or who are sick right now. And so having them navigate our health system during this pandemic has really made my anxiety levels go up. I've had friends who have tested positive for COVID. I've also had folks that I know who've passed away. So in the midst of all of that and making sure that my district is healthy and whole and getting through this and sort of preparing for all of the heavy work ahead of us in the assembly and in the legislature is really stressful to me. I am spending a portion of my day always outside. I have a horrific backyard. I haven't been able to plant as much as I would like, but I make sure that I go out a couple of times a week and weed and just tend to the garden and tend to the yard in the front and to water the plants that are there. But to just touch the soil, I do that every day, regardless of if I'm actually able to weed, because that for me helps to create balance inside of me, and it helps me to sort of recognize my role on this earth and in this world. And it allows me to reflect, and it's a bit of therapy. So my recommendation to folks who can is to hug on a plant or to do some gardening, to just touch the soil in some kind of way.
Beautiful. And now can we hear from Culver City Council Member Daniel Lee?
Thank you, and thank you for having me as part of this conversation. Happy Earth Day. Happy to serve on the City Council in Culver City. Full disclosure, I've also volunteered with the Sierra Club for 8 to 10 years, something like that, on the Clean Break Committee. Many Thursday and Sunday evenings spent in David's living room, For me, this pandemic has been very personal because I have a lot of family who work in the medical profession, a lot of family who are nurses. My brother and sister-in-law are doctors, and I touch base with my brother weekly to make sure that he has enough PPE because he had to provide it for himself for the first month because his hospital did not have any at all. But my suggestions for weathering this pandemic, for those of you who have a lot of free time, which I don't think the senator and the assembly member do, I would recommend coming up with some type of routine, because I know people's sleeping patterns have changed due to stress and anxiety, and mental health is one of the things that people think about last until they have an emergency. So a routine can make you calm down. And for those who have busier schedules, like the assembly member and the senator, I would just suggest making some time in every day to really just be with yourself, whether that's mindfulness, whether that's, watching your favorite show again. Sometimes watching things again is actually better than watching new stuff. Or just, being quiet. I usually just listen to music, but I'm very happy to be here as part of the discussion.
Excellent. Monica, did you want to go next?
Glad to. Thanks again, everyone, for having me here today. My name is Monica Embry, and I'm a National Associate Director with the Sierra Club on our Beyond Dirty Fuels campaign that focuses on oil and gas issues here in California. And I'm really excited about this 50th anniversary of Earth Day and spending some time with you talking about this very important issue happening here in Los Angeles. In terms of the coronavirus crisis, my heart goes out to each and every one of you, and especially all of our essential workers who are doing so much on the front lines to take care of all of us. Thank you to everyone from medical workers to grocery store workers, truck drivers, childcare providers, for all that you are doing to make sure that we can stay safer at home, and really appreciate the incredible leadership of some of the elected officials on our call today and many more across our community who are standing up to make sure that all of us can be safe as possible in this moment. The way that I am getting through is by spending quite a lot of time in my kitchen and really enjoying baking and cooking, looking up old recipes of my grandmother and trying to really reconnect with what really healthy food looks like. And I've also helped start my own backyard compost and use this time to really think about getting all of that organic material back into the soil, and so we can continue to grow healthy food at home. So thanks again, Barbara.
Great ideas. Dr. Hockey?
Yeah, thank you for everyone for being on the call today. It's just a thrill to have this conversation. And as you've already heard, I'm chair of the Sierra Club's Clean Break team, which is about the just transition from dirty fossil fuels to a clean energy economy. It's a thrill to have this conversation because we know how important leadership is in accomplishing this. By way of my personal story, I am an infectious diseases specialist at UCLA and the Veterans Affairs Hospital in Los Angeles. And I just want to say that we all, appreciate the leadership, because when we have good leadership, it makes our job so much easier and so much safer. And I think, fortunately, LA County and California, the state of California, have that leadership. So we're very appreciative of that. So thank you.
Thank you. The Inglewood Oil Field is the largest urban oil field in the country. Around 500,000 Angelenos live within half a mile of an active well. Of course, we know that the oil production fuels our current climate chaos and also harms local residents' health. Unfortunately, we're also learning that the same air pollutants that are part of that production also increase the risk of complications for COVID-19. Big Oil is aggressively fighting against regulation and common sense protections. And so today we're going to be discussing what our elected leaders and the Sierra Club activists are doing to be part of the solution to protect our public health and our environment. Thank you, and I'll turn it over to you now, Dr. Hockey.
Thank you, Barbara. Let's start with a little bit of background information. Monica, why don't you go ahead and give us some background to get our conversation started?
I'm glad to, and here I can share a quick presentation that we've put together to talk about this issue. So today we are going to be focusing our conversation on the Inglewood Oil Field. And I want to just give a little bit of background about oil and gas production here in California. So despite being a state that many consider a forward-looking and climate leader, California is actually number 7 in the country for oil production. And on average, in January 2020 data, California produced 426,000 barrels of crude oil. And so when we look around our entire state, there is a serious issue that we need to address in order to really be taking on climate change, and that is the question of oil production. Los Angeles is LA County is the 2nd largest area where oil is drilled and produced in California. And we have a very long history of oil production. Looking back on old photos of Venice Beach and Signal Hill, we can see that the landscape was covered in oil derricks. And there are approximately 20,000 oil and gas wells spread all across LA County. Today, about 5,000 of those wells are still active or idle, meaning that they could be turned on again. And these are things that are happening right in our neighborhoods, in our backyards, which makes LA especially an important area to be addressing the crisis of urban oil production. The Inglewood Oil Field, as Barbara mentioned, is the largest urban oil field in the country because of the high concentration of people that live in close proximity to active oil wells. The Inglewood Oil Field is in the area around Baldwin Hills and Culver City. It's actually not in Inglewood, despite its name. And there are about 600 active and idle wells and 600 abandoned and retired wells in the area. Every single day, residents in Baldwin Hills and Culver City are exposed to heavy truck traffic and toxic chemicals that are used to pump and extract oil. And we know that 1 million people live within 5 miles of this area. The community, homes, schools, churches, and other faith places we worship, businesses are all exposed to the toxic pollution that comes out of urban oil drilling at the Inglewood Oil Field, which is why it's an area that we are choosing to focus our Earth Day conversation on today. And again, these issues are multiple. So when we look at the health impacts associated with neighborhood oil drilling, there are dozens of toxic chemicals that are emitted from this process that impact everything from cardiovascular issues to eye and nose irritation, respiratory disease like asthma and COPD, endocrine disruption, and even cancers like lymphoma and premature death. It has also very significant impacts on our environment. Continued drilling at Inglewood Oil Field and across the LA Basin would be equivalent to the annual emissions of 9.6 million passenger cars or 11 coal plants. And we know that oil drilling causes spills. There's been a long legacy of toxic spills at the Inglewood Oil Field from when the dam broke to about a decade ago when residents were had to force from their homes because of the toxic spills, to even as recently as last month, there was a spill at the Inglewood Oil Field. So we know that this drilling is having a negative impact on our health, our climate, and our local environment. Not to mention that the Baldwin Hills Inglewood Oil Field is directly beside Kenneton State Park, which has home to hundreds of bird species and other animals that really count on our natural environment. Last, I'll say that this is an issue of environmental justice and equity. We know that the community that lives directly beside this oil field is disproportionately impacted to the effects of the pollution. And the community in this area is disproportionately African American compared to the rest of the breakdown of LA County and the state of California. These are issues that impact all of us, with people in the greater Baldwin Hills region going to the ER for asthma attacks 4.4 times more often than other residents in the area. So we have an issue where environmental pollution and coronavirus are coming to head, where we have our neighborhood actually contributing pollution and causing significant health impacts. Data recently from Harvard has been covered by the New York Times and World Economic Forum is showing the deadly link between air pollution and higher rates of coronavirus deaths. So we are calling for an end as the Sierra Club with many of our allies and other leaders to an end to neighborhood oil drilling. We do not think it's okay for nasty polluting wells to be directly beside our schools, homes, faith institutions, businesses, and communities. We want an end to drilling where we're living. And we know that together we can win this fight, which is why Sierra Club is so proud to be having this conversation with some top elected leaders who've been helping lead the charge on our local and state level to help protect our communities, our climate, and our environment from the dangerous impacts of urban oil drilling. Thanks so much, David. I will stop sharing my screen and turn it back over to you.
All right, great intro. Thank you so much. I think I'd like to just open it up to some general comments. Senator Mitchell, please give us your perspectives on some of these issues.
Well, again, thanks for the opportunity, and this is really an important time for us to begin to have the conversation. My history with Inglewood Oil Fields goes back to, the family folklore was that my mother was pregnant when the dam broke. I'm a product of Leimert Park. Fast forward many years later, I was the CEO of Crystal Stairs Child Development Agency and was invited to a meeting to talk about emergency evacuation procedures for Inglewood. And they talked about their plan for evacuating homes and schools. And it occurred to me sitting in that meeting that through Crystal Stairs, I happened to know that there were dozens of family-based childcare providers and childcare centers that weren't on the radar screen of the oil company that owned and operated Inglewood at that time, and that they hadn't really scratched the surface in terms of fundamentally understanding who they were putting at risk. Not only the residents who live there, but families, quite frankly, who drive their very young children into that community to receive daycare on a daily basis. And so that was my first kind of professional connection to advocacy around protecting the residents of that community, even before becoming elected. Once elected, ITs often talk about losing my front teeth over the battle over the now 2 bills I've introduced in an effort to ban fracking. Once when I was in the Assembly in 2013, then the Senate bill, one of the first bills I introduced when I was elected to the Senate in 2014. And as you all know, they didn't get very far, but it was an important conversation to have. And it was important for me to have the opportunity as a native of Leimert Park, having grown up as a little kid watching those oil derricks in Inglewood, pretending they were dinosaurs. It was important for me to be able to show an aerial view of the area to my colleagues in the legislature, my colleagues who represent the Central Valley, who fundamentally believe that without drilling, the entire economic health of their communities would be at risk. So it was important for them to understand what it means for 1 million Angelenos to live in such close proximity, because it's different from their experience. And so I think while unsuccessful in those first 2 legislative efforts, those early conversations were very important. to educate them, to reorient my colleagues who have supported drilling, their careers, to understand from the perspective of someone who represents the largest urban oil field in the country. I'm proud of the work this administration has done already in terms of, banning permitting. Looking forward to the ongoing work this administration has begun to talk about around setbacks and all the steps you all have been advocating for years. I think we now have a sympathetic ear in this administration, and I think that we'll see greater progress with DOGGR and all the roles state agencies can play in getting us to a point where there is no more drilling where we're living.
And thank you for those fantastic efforts. It's taken a while, but we're making progress. So thank you very much for all of that you have been doing. Assemblymember Kamlager, this is your district too. So let's hear your perspective.
Thank you for the opportunity to talk on this, David. And thank you, Monica, for that great tutorial. Because you said it in all of those slides. I oftentimes think back to the tour that I participated on with Cal, EPA, and some environmental justice advocates. And we took a tour, not just through the 54th district, but through most of South Los Angeles and the South Bay. And I was able to see Superfund sites. I was able to drive down the 710 corridor. I was able to visit a number of filling stations where leakages are occurring right next to elementary schools. And I think about, and I talk about that tour all of the time, because as you know, as you showed, in many of the sites that we visited, they were located in low income and in minority communities, which is often where a lot of the oil activity is happening. And it is often where there are fewer regulatory protections that are availed to those communities. And we don't really like to talk about sort of racism and classism in our policy conversations, because they seem like boogeymen and people get uncomfortable, but it's really true. And we have an obligation, and I feel like I have an obligation when I'm on the assembly floor to talk about what I see, because we are certainly not visiting oil wells, in Malibu and in Beverly Hills, although I know that there are a couple of them, but they're just well sort of decorated and covered. But one of the first things I did when I got to the assembly was I helped to whip votes for a bill authored by Assemblymember Holden to close old wells. This was the end of April. I think I had been sworn in for about 3 days. It was maybe my 4th day on the floor. And I said, okay, well, this will be easy because everyone in my district supports this. This won't be a problem. We can get to 41. And I walked up and down the floor for minutes and minutes and minutes. And eventually, with Assemblymember Holden, had to watch this bill die, which made absolutely no sense to me because it was old wells that hadn't been in operation for at least 10 years. And didn't that make sense? It made so much sense to me. And to have members look me in the eye and say, I'm not going to vote on this. And I had to think back to the tours that I've been on where it's like, this absolutely makes complete sense. So I think about that. I think about the reality that so much of this activity is happening in low income and minority communities. I think about the misinformation that is out there, the lack of transparency as it relates to the oil industry and fracking, and the demands that those are putting on how we live and on our public health, and how misinformation can be as big of a devil as the person in the White House right now. I think about our fossil fueled hedonism. It's something in which we are all participating in some way or another, and how we have to really own our responsibility and the part that we are playing in this pandemic and in this climate crisis that we're in right now, and figure out how in large ways at the policy level and in small ways with our immediate family circles that we can play a role in the solution. And then I think about the scale of the mitigation challenge that is in front of us. And it takes all of us working together, pushing different kinds of legislative advocacy, budgetary, and regulatory levers to fix this, to stop this. You know, I have said, you know, throughout all of this that, you know, we're the virus. We are causing these things. And so if we are going to take responsibility for this, then we have to take responsibility for the solutions that we have to put in front of us to clean the planet and to stop the emissions that are polluting and killing us.
Well, maybe that theme of taking responsibility for our actions is going to carry us through. Thank you. That's huge. Councilmember Lee, you have the privilege of serving the city of Culver City, which actually has 10% of the Inglewood Oil Field in your city. Your duties to protect the public, we sincerely appreciate, and all that you've been doing. So I'd love to have you tell us a little bit about what you and the city are doing.
Sure. I'd like to step back a little first, because I was first acquainted with the problem of urban oil drilling in Los Angeles County when I was completing an environmental justice fellowship at the Liberty Hill Foundation. This was just prior to the formation of Stand LA, and I got to know groups like Communities for a Better Environment, Esperanza Community Housing Corporation, East Yard Communities for Social Justice, and got to know Mark Lopez, whose language I use a lot because he doesn't talk really about environmental justice. He talks about environmental racism. And I also got to visit a number of the sites, particularly around USC, where I did my undergrad, where there are oil derricks right next to houses and apartment buildings, and Esperanza Community Housing Corporation have been working to close them down for quite some time. In the last few years, they've had some great success, so very happy for them, but it really sort of opened my eyes as I had come from Florida, and well, I come from Alabama, but I grew up in Florida. And one of the first actions I took was, when I was in middle school, I wrote a letter to the president asking to ban offshore drilling in Florida. Never got a response, but I did mail the letter. But that sort of laid the foundation for the type of work that I wanted to do much later. Also, when I was at UCLA, one of the projects that I focused on actually used a lot of the information from California EPA's Cal EnviroScreen tool, and I hope that tool will be used to influence legislation at the state level more frequently, because what it looks at is the cumulative impacts of pollution from multiple sources. Because as the assembly member said, a lot of these highly polluted areas are in Black and brown neighborhoods, but they aren't just polluted by oil and gas. There's also like, a rendering factory for produce for pigs or chickens, or there's 10 auto body shops. A lot of those auto body shops happen to be next to a freeway, which is also next to an elementary school. So we really need to look at the cumulative impacts. I think a lot of times the reason that action isn't taken is because these pollution sources are looked at individually, and we don't look at the real sort of, I guess, amalgam of, challenges that we're really putting on the development of our children and the health of adults in our aged population. So I was very proud when, 2 months into being elected on the Culver City Council, we voted to close down our portion of the Inglewood Oil Field, because I think everyone in the council agreed, one, our charge is to protect the health and safety of our residents and our stakeholders. And two, even if there was some type of calculation that we could do, there was really no financial benefit for the city. I personally would not have been swayed if there was a financial benefit, but we did the analysis, for the benefit of some of my other colleagues. So I'm very happy to be here, very happy to join the conversation, but I think we do need to look at the issue from a real holistic point of view. It's not just pollution that we're burdening these communities with. It often comes with a lot of other challenges.
Absolutely. And thank you again to Culver City for being out front there. I'd like to come back to Senator Mitchell and sort of continue some of the things that you were talking about in terms of what the state is doing and has been working on and can continue to work on to address these issues of urban oil production.
Yes, as I said, I'm happy about the current administration and the actions that they've taken. And I think a little later we're going to talk about Assemblymember Marsucci's bill around the setback. And I think the reality, all of us have used our various bully pulpits. I've toured the Allen Cove site because I have the honor of not only representing Inglewood Oil Fields, but the oil fields and the residents who neighbor them in Jefferson Park and West Adams. And so we've toured Allen Cove, wrote a letter to the Archdiocese, that partnered with many of the community-based organizations and key stakeholders, the environmental justice stakeholders, to talk about what we're going to do with that property in Jefferson Park and what the Catholic Church is going to do and what responsibility they're going to take as the landowner. And so that's some of the work that we're continuing to do in our elected capacity, outside of legislation. I was really intrigued as budget chair about the possibility, what the possibilities could be for the Jefferson Park property. And part of the letter and the advocacy with the mayor and others who have influence over the Archdiocese. The mayor told me, he even mentioned it, Mayor Garcetti told me he even mentioned it when he had audience with the Pope. Is to figure out, if the Catholic Church, if the Archdiocese will sell it, then what? Who will be responsible for remediation and what role the state can play? So that's some of the work that we're continuing to do. Again, I mentioned earlier about the governor's executive action with regard to permitting. And I think there's great opportunity to continue that kind of work via executive order, particularly given what the Assembly member said was her most recent experience. I talked about my experience in 2013, 2014, when I could get neither bill off of the floor of the House of Origin. And here in more recent years, she had a similar experience in terms of not being able to levy the votes in two houses that I might remind us that are both supermajority Democrat. The Assembly has a supermajority Democrats, as does the Senate. So we have a lot of work to continue to do, particularly given the fact that, quite frankly, to be a little bit partisan for a minute, the state Democratic Party has for years had a very progressive party platform around oil drilling and fossil fuel use. You all know the LA County Board of Supervisors has passed a really aggressive or has adopted a very aggressive plan around zero fossil fuel consumption by the County of Los Angeles. We have to now talk about what steps we take to get us to these very visionary type goals. What actions must we take as elected bodies at all levels of government, city, county, and state, to ultimately get us there. I think we're positioned better than we were in 2013, and clearly we have a ways to go.
Wow, that's a lot of progress that we've made, and thank you for your leadership on that. So you brought up Assembly Bill 345, Al Marsucci's bill that called for a 2,500-foot setback, and the work now that the CalGEM is doing to get public input. Assemblymember Kamlager, how do you see the path forward?
So you know, I was actually very excited that the bill came up, and surprised actually that it came up as early as it did, because normally you don't have that much activity in the first couple of months in session. But somebody had a crystal ball, because it got through and it got over to the Senate side. You know, and then COVID hit. And we've been in recess and are just sort of getting ready to gear up to go back. The senator held a hearing just a week ago. The assembly held a hearing just the other day. We are gearing up to go back around May 4th. Let's cross our fingers. But on the assembly side and on the Senate side, many members are looking at their legislative package, weighing the heft of the load, and will be charged with really working on post-COVID legislation, given the compression of time that we will be in, and recognizing that the number one priority right now is passing a budget that can keep California moving. So my hope is that even though AB 345 is on hold in the Senate, that it will push through in the midst of all of the other things that we will be dealing with, and that it will come back, you know, to us if need be, so that we can vote on it and send it to the governor for his signature. We will be trying to figure out a way to pass COVID-related legislation, but also legislation that we know is important, regardless of what we're going through now, but legislation that's important to Californians everywhere. But I want to say, you know, that while the state makes these great charges, that we're not doing enough. You know, the fact of the matter is that earlier this month, the administration granted approval for 24 new fracking permits, which is a reversal on the moratorium on new permits for fracking in the state of California. And we know that this is a bad deal for communities everywhere. As the senator mentioned, we have a supermajority in both houses, but we know that Democrats come from all, you know, are all different hues, and many of them have real economies that are dependent on this industry, that create real jobs. And it's like, how do you push the envelope and have conversations around protecting Mother Earth and weaning yourself off of this kind of economy in a way that makes sense and in a way that people can see? So we have to do more, and we have to do better. You know, last year the legislature passed SB 1, which was really important. It would have protected federal environmental and labor law regulations in California if Trump weakened or repealed those federal laws. And we know that, you know, deviant person doing deviant things, and it passed. It in the wee hours of the night, we got it off the floor, and it was vetoed by the governor. So that's what I mean when I say we can be doing more. And sometimes we have to just step uncomfortably into the spaces that we know speak for true environmental justice and equity issues, and push these across the finish line and into signage and chaptering.
Well said, well said. And before we come back to Culver City, I wanted to get Monica's perspective on the CalGEM process.
Absolutely. Yeah, and thank you, Senator and Assembly Member, for sharing those wise words with us. I think that is exactly right, and we couldn't agree more. You know, last November, Governor Newsom directed his state agency that regulates oil and gas, which is called CalGEM, to develop their first ever public health and safety rule. And given our current coronavirus crisis, this couldn't feel like a more important time for the state to be moving forward with developing the absolute strongest protections for our community members, for the thousands and thousands of people who right now are staying at home, which means they are breathing in the toxic air that comes from living right beside urban oil drilling every single day, 24/7. right? And so the family members, the children, the elders right now who are breathing that toxic air absolutely deserve the strongest protections possible. And we also know that in the last few weeks, as many of us are struggling to make sure we can feed our families or bring toilet paper home or just adjust to this new reality, we have seen statewide oil industry lobbyists put forward letter after letter after letter to our governor administration, to our state Congress folks, right, calling on rollbacks to regulations, calling for a stop to move forward on different efforts. And so now is a time for the public and for everyone who cares about these issues to make sure we are taking action and calling on the governor to continue forward with his public health and safety rule. The Sierra Club is joined by hundreds of other allies, including STAND LA and the Last Chance Alliance. We are calling on the administration to move forward with a statewide setback of 2,500 feet, because we know that science dictates that is the minimum safe distance between where someone should live and where oil drilling should happen. And the fact is 2,500 feet is less than half a mile. That's a common sense distance to be away from these incredibly toxic industrial facilities. And so we need to be protecting our kids, our elders, and our family members by ensuring that the new public health and safety rule that CalGEM moves forward actually allows for that 2,500 foot setback. And a quick plug, if you want to take action, we have a short link that you can do. I wouldn't be an organizer if I didn't give you a way to take action. You can sign up at sc.org/CA-oil. That's SC for Sierra Club.org/CA-oil. We'll be sure to put that in the comment as well, as a way where you can sign up online today and send your message to Governor Newsom and CalGEM that we absolutely need a 2,500 foot human health and safety buffer between where we live, work, play, and pray, and call for an end to oil drilling in our backyards. David, thanks. Back to you.
Awesome. All right. So that's an easy to remember link there, and is a perfect segue to what Culver City is doing to take action on this issue and move forward boldly, courageously, and make a difference for people who actually are living within that 2,500 foot set area, that buffer area. So Daniel.
Yeah, I want to say, frankly, you know, the reason Culver City moved forward is really because people organized and pushed Culver City forward. As I mentioned in my intro, you know, for many years, I worked with the Sierra Club Clean Break Committee with David, a number of Sierra Club organizers, a number of volunteers from around LA County on various issues, both in Culver City, you know, Montebello, Whittier, various issues. You know, a few years before I was elected, we were really focused on the EIR and trying to get as strong regulations as possible for the new operator, Sentinel Peak Resources. And, you know, we were primarily motivated by what Monica was just talking about, the science. But the science was coupled with people power. And the people pressured not only the current elected officials, but potential elected officials. And to some degree, I think me and a couple of my colleagues were elected because of our stance on the Inglewood Oil Field. This came from the people. It wasn't really the council. It wasn't a bold decision. It was reacting to the organization that took place by people who care about the health and safety of their family and their broader community. So when it finally came up for a vote for the city council, it was very easy for us to vote unanimously to close the field down. After that point, you know, we had to get into some of the legal arguments in terms of, okay, is the oil company going to sue us? When are they going to sue us? What can we do to make them less likely to sue us? And in that context, you know, we decided to go into an amortization study, which has been in process almost since I was elected. It's almost been 2 years. But I checked with our city attorney just last week, And we are nearing the end of that study. There actually should be a report and an opportunity for public comment and public interaction by May 21st, I'm told. Excuse me. And we hope to be done with at least our part of the study by early summer. As I said, we expect the oil company to have some objections to the study, but our city attorney, who is very cautious and conservative, thinks we're on very firm legal ground, and there is precedent out there. So long story short, we moved because our residents and our stakeholders told us to. It made it easy for us to look bold. We were not. And I think that's what I really want to underline. Like all of these actions that we're asking people to take, politicians on the local, county, and state level, are not bold. They are being framed that way to make it seem as if environmental advocates advocating for the basic health and safety of themselves, their family, and their community are somehow asking for too much. I think that's a minimum. There's so much more that we can do.
Fantastic, and I love the way you put that. It's just common sense. It's the right thing to do, and we've had a great discussion today. Really appreciate everybody's perspectives on what the state can do, what our local cities can do. This is a very hopeful conversation, and it's really great to be part of it. I'd like to give everybody one more chance to sort of give us some closing words. We are looking forward to, slowly emerging from the whole coronavirus pandemic and getting our economies going again, getting our work on these important issues like neighborhood oil drilling, moving forward, getting that 2,500 foot setback, amortizing out getting the plan for amortizing out the oil operations in Culver City. So Senator Mitchell, what are some of your closing thoughts?
I appreciate this opportunity and thank you very much. And I just want to make sure that the Assemblywoman who said her backyard is full of weeds will make sure that she sees my lovely flower here.
I saw. You're
I'm
making us jealous.
That's right. She's jealous.
Those are beautiful flowers.
As I was listening to the councilman talk about, what courage really looks like and who the three of us as electeds are activist policymakers, quite frankly. We come from activist roots and that's what encouraged the three of us to run for office. And so it's making sure that Sierra Club and all of the environmental justice organizations understand the lane you're in and the role you play in terms of pushing policy. And in listening to you, Councilman, it made me pull up the list of opposition to the two bills that I introduced, just to give us a frame of reference. And so when the California Chamber of Commerce calls a bill a job killer in this current climate and environment that we're currently in, and which will be exacerbated as we find ourselves trying to rebuild as a result of COVID-19, we have to be clear about who we're fighting, quite frankly. And it's not just Western States Petroleum Association and all the usual suspects, but it's the California State Pipe Trades Council. It's people who, California Small Business Alliance. It's others who are engaged in the conversation around jobs and employment. And so we have to help that community also see the light. So that's, another community that we're not going to fight against when we're trying to make sure that people have the right to breathe clean air and live healthily in their own community. Finally, I just say, what strikes me as we spend so much of our time talking about COVID, the Assemblywoman and I were on a Black Caucus call yesterday with the governor, who shared with us devastating statistics in terms of the number of African-American fatalities as a result of COVID. And what struck us was not only the number, that it's a disproportionate high rate compared to our numbers in the overall state, county, or city population, but also who within the Black community. And we're all hearing the high-risk population is 65 and older and those with other, obvious health conditions. But for Black people in California, it's 18 to 49. And when we think about the population that lives around Inglewood, the other oil fields that are in the 30th Senate District, when we recognize how many of them have health conditions, asthma, other respiratory conditions because of the zip code in which they were born and live, this is yet another layer that further should invigorate our fight and brings value to this issue around environmental, economic, and health justice for all California residents. So I appreciate the opportunity. Know that we will continue to partner, and happy Earth Day to each and every one of us.
Thank you. That's great. The nexus between getting our economy going again, and paying attention to the things that matter to every single California resident.
Right.
Assembly Member Kamlager, thank you for being part of the panel today. Give us some closing thoughts.
Great, and thank you again for the invitation. I want to echo a lot of what the senator said. I'm in that at-risk population group, so I think about that all the time, which is really scary. But thinking about the economy is important. We just learned that half of LA County is not working right now because of the pandemic. And when we ease out of this, every single person that is now unemployed is not necessarily going to go back to the job that they had. And so when you're talking about all of the fights that we are in, fighting towards justice, it really is important to also talk about economies. Done properly, we can actually create a transition that respects the needs of workers, community members, nearby businesses, and local governments. We have got to get out of this binary either or mindset that we allow ourselves to fall in. It is the devil, and we get nowhere when we allow ourselves to be pitted against someone in that kind of fight. So I'm interested in pursuing means whereby infrastructure projects can get funded and implemented that can accommodate this economy at a union scale that is not producing fossil fuel, but is producing healthy outcomes that will benefit all of us. It can be done. And we allow ourselves to succumb to these crazy arguments when we don't talk about that. If we have scientists out there that are talking to us about how we can save the planet, we also have economists out there that can talk to us about how to grow it economically, where we're still living here breathing some clean air. I know that there's not one approach that is going to satisfy everybody, and every situation requires diverse local representation to ensure that whatever the plan is equitable, is accessible, is fair, and works. And I believe that folks like the Sierra Club and other EJ advocates are going to lead us into that new space. So this is my call to action to Sierra Club. Lead us into that new space, because you have the people power, you have the advocacy, and you have the data that will turn lives and conversations around. Lawmakers are people too, and we connect with because we have our own stories. And so share your stories along with that data to help move California and everyone else to the place we need to be. One of the things I talk about all the time is my goal to create urban farming. We just don't need to have ag and rural communities. And if ever we are going to talk about how to create sustainable lifestyles that are good for our bodies and good for the earth, the time is now.
Oh my goodness, those are inspiring words. Thank you. We hear the call to action. Thank you. So let's close it out with Councilmember Lee. What does it look like? What does the Green New Deal look like in Culver City with 100 acres of Inglewood Oil Field being repurposed somehow for the benefit of of all residents.
David, if you don't mind, I'd actually like to talk a little bit more about a just transition. So I think in the context of COVID-19 right now, it's very important. Like, I appreciate both what the senator and the assembly member said, but I think we need to look at two things. One, right now, 50% of Angelenos aren't working. That's true, but 50% are. And 50% who are, many of them are not driving. So when we go back to whatever normal or whatever approximation of normal is, we should also ask, do these people have to drive? Like, do people have to drive to work every day to do this job, or can we do that some other way? Is the clean air we have right now something that we can have for a much longer time? The other thing that we should not overlook is what happened yesterday. The price of oil went into negative territory. And people will tell you all the time, okay, oil being inexpensive is not good for the environment. But it does bring me back to something that I argue with a lot of my union friends about, because I've talked a lot about, when I was less involved with politics, me hearing a whole lot about the Green-Blue Alliance or the Blue-Green Alliance, but in recent years, it not being something that actually exists. I think that's what we need. I think that's what we need in the context of a Green New Deal. I took a trip, a tour of the Inglewood Oil Field with the oil operator, Sentinel Peak Resources. One of the things they were talking about a lot was turning the oil field into housing. I think that is a horrible plan. The field will take so many years of remediation. If people rush into a plan like that, all we're gonna do is make people sick. A long-term plan, which we've spoken about in Culver City, is to try to make the Inglewood Oil Field a central park of the West. But I think we need to think bigger in the context of the Blue-Green Alliance. I also had an opportunity to go to IBEW and their Electrical Training Institute. Now, a lot of the union workers at IBEW are the same workers who work, on oil derricks, at refineries, off the coast. But one of the other things that IBEW trains these same workers for is to work on solar panels and to work on fiber optics and to work on the type of infrastructure that actually supports the emerging technologies that we have right now and the type of technologies that would allow more people to work from home and to not drive. So if we're thinking about a just transition, we need to think both on the local, county, and state level in terms of how to fund the just transition and what type of jobs we want people to do. And I think to get there, we need a Green-Blue Alliance, like one that's real. And we need a lot of the unions to recognize that what we saw yesterday in the dip in the price of oil, that was a preview. These jobs aren't going to exist in 5 to 7 years. So if you want your members to remain employed, if you want them to still be able to provide for their families, to be healthy and safe, then you need to teach them how to do something else. We need to prepare for a new economy that is not only just and remunerative, but is clean. And I think we can do it if we just start today. Happy Earth Day.
Well, this has been a fabulous conversation, and I've learned so much. I've been inspired. I want to extend my huge appreciation to all of you in your busy schedules to make time for Earth Day, make time to share your perspectives. We deeply appreciate your leadership and all that you've been doing. It means so much to us, and we look forward to working with you going forward. So thank you so much.